You're listening to the Coaching Cast podcast with Susie and Lisa. We are super lucky to have this 7th season sponsored by our friend and YouTube's top breath coach, Mike Mayer from Take a Deep Breath. Mike is the first official sponsor of this podcast and specialises in reducing stress and anxiety through practical, fun and science-based breathing techniques. You can get started for free by clicking on the link in the show notes and downloading a free guided audio breathing exercise from Mike. Say goodbye to stress and hello to a more relaxed and chilled state of mind. And if you're interested in being a sponsor on this podcast, you can contact us by emailing hello@thecoachingcast.co.uk. Hi, I'm Lisa.
And I'm Susie, and this is the Coaching Cast. We are the no-nonsense podcast, chatting about the things impacting you at work right now, helping you to survive, but more importantly, thrive in today's ever-changing workplace.
We discuss different topics each episode, sharing our ideas, hints, and top tips from our experiences of working in the corporate world, running our own businesses, and also being qualified coaches. We also try to have a few laughs along the way too, because taking yourself too seriously is just boring. We really hope you enjoy listening. In today's episode, we're talking to our first guest of the 7th season, Nathan Whitbread, otherwise known as the Neurodivergent Coach. We are discussing with Nathan the topic of neurodiversity in the workplace. So stay with us and enjoy. So before we welcome Nathan to join us to talk about this really interesting topic of neurodiversity, what have you been up to, Suze? Tell me.
Well, it's been quite a week because on Saturday, so a few days ago, I went to TEDx Manchester. Unfortunately, not to speak, because that is one of my absolute dreams.
Not yet.
It's on my vision board, everybody, just manifesting that out into the universe. But me and my friend Katie, we went to TEDx Manchester to watch this amazing and incredible lineup of speakers. There was 15 speakers in total. And I have to say, it was honestly one of the most amazing days of my life. Aside from obviously like giving birth and getting married and all
all that sort of stuff. 15 speakers. Wow, I didn't realize there were so many.
Yeah, so it's quite a long day, but it didn't drag at all, because I was like, am I gonna be able to listen for that amount of time? But I activated my top tips from our previous episode on how to listen. And it was incredible. I have to say, they put on an amazing event. The stories were so powerful. There's lots of personal stories about all sorts of different topics. Like there was a speaker about sharks, a speaker about biodiversity, a speaker who'd invented the walking desk. There was conversations around male suicide and something called postvention. There was a fellow podcaster, so Damien Hughes from the Performance Podcast with Jake Humphrey. He was there talking about courage.
Oh, that is very cool. Talk about a high profiler.
Yeah. There was an incredible lady speaker who was a nurse with superpowers. So she had this ability to sniff disease in people. Okay.
No way. Really?
Yeah, she sniffed Parkinson's. Well, the smell of her husband changed over time, and she noticed it. She didn't know what it was, and it basically came about that he had started developing Parkinson's, and she had noticed that through his smell changing. Wow. And she's now working with the University of Manchester to like help them develop some testing, and other diseases as well. She was honestly phenomenal. She got a standing ovation because her story was incredibly moving. Her husband has now unfortunately passed away, but she'd never done anything like this before, and you could just tell it meant a lot to her. And she was incredible in terms of being a public speaker as well. So oh my goodness, like I was excited about the day. We went through a bit of a roller coaster of emotions as the day kind of went through. It was like funny at times. I was crying at times. I was kind of like intrigued at times. I learned new things. So it was quite a roller coaster. On Sunday, I think my brain was a bit like, wow, you've processed a lot of information in the last 24 hours.
It sounds so amazing. I would love to go to a TEDx day. I think it's an incredible experience, and it's been reinforced by your experience, for sure. So that's so cool.
It was phenomenal. So yeah, anybody who listens to TED Talks, then get yourself a ticket to your local TEDx. There's lots and lots of events around the country. You can just have a look and sign up. The Manchester one is always in March. It's every year. And it was phenomenal. And if you're in the Northwest, you definitely need to go next year, because I will most definitely be there.
Oh, wow. Well, hopefully on stage next year.
Well, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Manifesting
everyone.
into the universe.
Everyone manifest.
Let's get Susie onto the stage.
Get Susie onto the stage. It's incredible. Oh, I'm so excited. Well, from one extreme to the next, you had a fantastically cultural, moving experience on Saturday. I ended up going to a wine fair for the day where it just rained. So there was nothing particularly cultural about that. Well, it was supposed to be, because it was supposed to be wine educational. But everyone just got drenched. And it's, I mean, in South Africa, people in March, it's very unusual to have rain, but we actually had thunderstorms. And there was many disgruntled moments between my husband and I and said friends as we tackled rainstorms, mud, to try and get into this wine fair.
God, so yeah, sounds like a high-class Glastonbury.
Yeah, I really wouldn't give it that much credit. It wasn't that great. So yes, from one extreme to the other. But yes, I'm so pleased that TEDx Manchester was fantastic. So fantastic. And on that note, so you ended up spending the whole day talking to some inspirational individuals and really interesting individuals who taught you some new things. And I think the same can be said for today's guest, who I'm really keen to get on to talk to, especially as I haven't really got anything much more exciting to share other than that story of my wine festival experience, which was a bit damp. That was just like being back in the UK, to be quite frank. So I suggest we get Nathan on. What do you think?
Let's talk to Nathan. Let's do it.
Today we are really excited to welcome Nathan Whitbread to the Coaching Cast. Nathan provides consultancy, coaching and assistive technology training for dyslexic and neurodivergent individuals and teams. Nathan has worked in various roles across the technology sector and for over 8 years in engineering, commercial and leadership, holding leadership positions within the non-for-profit agency and leadership development sectors as well. Nathan's career highlight is becoming a coach and, in his own words, having the opportunity to work with some of my heroes. Nathan, welcome to the Coaching Cast.
Hello, welcome.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. We're very excited to have you here. As you can tell, you are our first guest of this season. And I always think the first guests get the most enthusiasm because we're like, oh, wow, someone else to talk to. Because me and Susie have been chatting to just each other for the first few episodes. So, yeah. You're going to get a lot of hyperactivity today, I think. As well as the fact that we're talking about a subject that I found hugely fascinating. I know you and I first met back in November, I think it was October time last year. And that was because I'd listened to you talk on another podcast, which I'd found extremely inspiring and was really keen to talk to you so that we could kind of steal you for our own podcast, I guess. But it's because this subject is so interesting and it has had a lot of attention, a lot of interest. There's a lot of it in the media. And more people, I believe, are talking about it, which I always think is ironic because it's not a new subject as such, but it seems to suddenly be getting attention. So, yeah, really excited to have you here to talk to us. So I think as a starting point, it feels right to actually talk about and potentially even explain to our listeners what the term neurodivergent actually means.
Yeah, sure. So if we roll back a little bit further and talk about what neurodiversity kind of means. So neurodiversity was first coined by a woman called Judy Singer, who's an Australian, and she was sort of studying the area, particularly around autism, actually. And she did some work, I think, with a guy called Harvey Bloom, who's an American journalist. They sort of coined this term. So that was very much talking about the autistic community. Since then, that's moved on. And the term neurodiversity, as I understand it, really means all of us, because we all think slightly differently, yeah? Because of who we are. And you've got these other wonderful words like intersectionality, which is another sort of buzzword, but basically just means we're made up of all the bits. You know, it's our social economic background, our gender, our sexuality, our schooling, our last boss, possibly even the person we met on the way to this call has influenced somewhat. But that kind of idea, and I always have this picture of this piece of wire that's wound together, and it's kind of all the different strands of who we are. So that's what intersectionality is all about. And that was really talking about females initially, but I think, again, that's a bigger, broader thing now. Now, when you talk about neurodivergent, what we're saying is that some people think quite a bit differently to the so-called normality of the kind of population, which is a bell curve. And what normal is, of course, a big discussion, because actually I think we've all experienced that. I don't know where normal sits, really, but, but there is some people that sit on maybe a little bit further out of that, whatever that normal is, and they would describe or sometimes describe themselves neurodivergent, and that typically incorporates some of the diagnosed conditions, so around autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia. And there's quite a few of them, Tourette's, dyslexia, and many others. Now, the thing about this neurodivergent space is, though, you've got this idea of diagnosis, but actually you don't have to have a diagnosis to have traits of this stuff, because one of the other things that's absolutely true, and this is based on work by Professor Amanda Kirby and others, that co-occurrence is the rule rather than the exception. That means if you've got traits of one thing, you're highly likely to have traits of another, and they may not hit a diagnostic threshold. So what does that mean? That means everyone's an individual in it, but noticing that can be really helpful. Long answer, I know. Is that helpful?
No, it's really, really helpful. And actually, I've never heard neurodiversity used to describe everybody before. I don't think, anyway. I think I've heard it used in the sense of labeling a group of people, which I do think societally and culturally we love to do. We love labeling groups to help us to interpret, decipher them, which is why I find it really interesting when you sort of use the word normal, and I use the word normal in inverted commas.
Those big inverted commas.
Yeah, because actually I do find it increasingly quite offensive, or it marginalizes the word normal, because I don't even know what that is anymore, and everybody is different. So it is a strange one, that word. But no, I find it very interesting. And then that differentiation, just to help with the neurodivergent, and therefore what falls within that. Yeah. So
the other bit can I add one bit to this, Lisa?
Of course you can, yeah, great.
I think it's really important. So my philosophy around this, and I know others sort of hold this, is that all these stuff, this labeling, I think it's a lens to look through, not a label to be worn. And I think that's really important in this space. And I know that's true for lots of things, but particularly in this space, because we've all got a view of what Bridget Jones is like, yeah? And Bridget Jones actually behaves a bit like someone who's got some dyspraxic traits. We've all got a view of what Dustin Hoffman was like in Rain Man. I can never remember the guy's name, but the guy that played the accountant, we've all got a view of what he was like.
Ben Affleck.
That's it, yeah.
Ben Affleck, yeah.
Believe it or not, not everyone on the
fantastic.
Well, exactly. Not everyone on the autistic spectrum behaves like that. They don't all have machine guns in their house, and they don't all work for the mafia as auditors. But those are stereotypes, however we choose to approach it, that we hold. And that is really important, I think.
Yeah, it's so true. And I love what you said about labels being a lens to look through, because I think that is so true as well. And not to go off topic, but with mental health disorders, I think that is so applicable there too. There's the stereotypical view and the fear that is associated with this as well, of mental health disorders like schizophrenia, like bipolar, but they are all so broad and varied, and one individual who has schizophrenia is not the same as another, and their condition and how it presents itself, and therefore the behavior is not the same. but just that word does strike a view for people, and it's frightening. So I do, and as I've got family members who have mental health disorders, and I know really quite strongly how labeling has many a time been very restrictive for them, and caused actually more harm than anything else, because they've got hung up on the label. And there's a real lack of sensitivity, therefore, then around how it's applied. So, yeah, I really like that. I think I want to nick that, actually, Nathan.
And also, I would argue, I'll just argue as well, Lisa, that although we've talked about lots of the lifelong neurodivergent conditions, so there is the whole acquired piece, and that looks like some of the things, and some of the things you've talked about, obviously lifelong as well, but some are acquired, like PTSD, bipolar, migraine even. We could even talk about menopause. I mean, I know that's a bit, but actually that does change the way that females think at certain points. And there's the whole perimenopause and what that looks like. This all impacts what goes on. And some of those things present like other neurodivergent conditions. So what's more, it's so important that we focus on the individual and where they're at, and what's coming back to that kind of idea of intersectionality and who they are, what's going on for them, and asking them is so important. What's helpful. Yeah,
for sure. Totally. So when we're talking about neurodiversity in the workplace, which are we right in saying that that's predominantly where you focus your coaching, is in the workplace? Yeah. So when we're talking about neurodiversity in the workplace, what is that?
That's individuals who've got so it's primarily about individuals got neurodivergent conditions or traits more importantly, and there's something there about working out how to make life work in a work context. There's also a piece about leaders and teams in terms of how to embrace those things, because with all of these neurodivergent traits, there are strengths and there are difficulties. And the key thing, I think, is how do we help individuals and teams amplify their strengths and manage the things they find difficult?
And are you able to bring that to life for us in terms of what that could look like, in terms of when you talk about the difficulties and the strengths? Let's talk about both.
Sure. So it could be around making changes about how we actually structure what we do. How do we communicate? So for some individuals, agenda is really important, and actually knowing what part they need to play, because maybe they find it difficult in social situations, especially when they're not clear on what's happening. Whereas some of us, we're quite happy to freestyle it, but that doesn't work for everyone. So having that structural in place, things like, just off some of the things that I've worked around is not being asked to do minutes, when the way your processing works is that when you're doing those minutes, you can't focus on anything else. Now, we've obviously got lots of super tools now that can help work with that. And sometimes it's not about technology, it's about culture, because some organizations have a view, well, we don't want things recorded. The question is, well, if we build a structure that says we make a recording and then that recording may be destroyed once the notes have been written up, within your data protection policy, what is the problem? Sort of challenging some of those ideas. This is the way things have always been done around here, and it comes back to that question of why are you doing it that way? What's that all about? And there's also some pieces around, tools that can be used to support individuals. Maybe it's around the writing process, and I'm a big believer in project. And what I mean by that is that for individuals that have neurodivergent, quite often we're on a project, because I've got some of this stuff going on in my own life, and it's about constantly assessing, well, what works, what's changed, what needs to change. And the thing that remains consistent is the processes that we use quite often. And what we do is we slot in other tools at various times as they become useful. So, for example, the resurgent, sort of the AI revolution is going on, and that's really helpful. But knowing how those tools are helpful is really important. Because there's something here as well about the tools can sometimes become the problem, and it's that classic thing about, well, I'll give you a great tool to fix X, but it also does Y, Z, P, and Q. But Y, Z, P, and Q are a big distraction for me, because actually I'm always interested in new shiny things. So that tool that could have solved X really well has
Yeah.
now completely broken me because I'm completely distracted by all the other stuff I don't really understand. And just to sort of throw a scenario to you, and my employer's paid for that. So I feel guilty they paid for that and I don't really know how to use it and it's not really helping me. So now I'm completely kind of like, what do I do? And this is some of the situations that I get involved in working out how to do that well. And it's a fine line. And there's an element of negotiation in here as well, in terms of working out what works best for the individual, but also for the organization, because no individual in an organization is a silo. They've got to interact. So how do we make sure they've got the tools and the processes that allow them to interact and to work stuff out?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of this sounds like, and I don't mean to oversimplify this at all, but it comes down to what we talk about a lot here on the coaching cast, which is in leadership, recognizing that you lead different people and that no one person is the same. And that as a really effective leader trying to build an effective team, you do need to be prepared to invest time in every single person to get to know them and understand how they think, what's important to them, what works well for them and what doesn't, and building that trust to be able to have those open conversations where people feel like they can truly share.
I totally agree. And if you didn't do that, you could probably get a robot to do that job.
Yeah, exactly.
It's true, isn't it? You just go, there's the cookie cutter approach to leadership. We just plug you in and tell you what to do. Actually, but we're human and we need to have human conversations and we need to work it out, and we have to keep working it out because what's true today won't necessarily be true tomorrow. So
absolutely.
And that's what makes this exciting.
Yeah. And also we're ever evolving, aren't we, as well as people and as individuals through our experiences. So I think that becomes even more important the more we've perhaps longer we've been in an organization or we've been in a role as well, or the longer we've worked with people, because then assumption starts to come into it for others, I think.
And institutionalization is also a big factor. Even in funky companies that are brand new, we still get institutionalized if we're not careful.
Absolutely. I've definitely experienced that myself. I hold my hands up. I know I've become institutionalized within organizations when I've worked there for too long. And actually, it's been the impetus to go, which is that realization of I need to break out, try something new, expand, challenge myself. So no, it's interesting. Because what is the power of neurodiversity in the workplace? Would you say?
I think it's the innovative edge. I really do. I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and we were trying to look some sort of like cutting edge research that sort of demonstrates that, and a lot of it's kind of indicative. There's no sort of, I can't point you at a paper that says bomb, but I think it's the innovative edge. Because have you ever come across Sir Ken Robinson? I think he died quite recent, well, not that long ago, but he did this brilliant TED. I mean, it's a massive TED talk about education. This idea that the way the education system's ranked is you've got maths and English somewhere in the sky and drama and CDT somewhere under the floor in terms of what people think. But of course, when you go into industry, that's all kind of like hygiene, maths and English.
Yes, yeah.
Drama and CDT that produce innovation. So it kind of turns upside down. And I really, and from the individuals that I've worked with, there's cutting breakthrough stuff there. But if we don't create the environment where that can be brought to the surface, where that can play a part in how we shape our products, our services, our processes, our customer experience, then we're losing something. So it's kind of like gold that's ready to be tapped. And as with all this stuff around recruitment, you may already have the things in your organization that completely transform it, but are you listening to them?
Yeah. It's so interesting that when you talk about education, because I do think I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, Nathan, because of your personal experience. But I know from having a sibling who's dyslexic, my younger sisters was dyslexic. And when you look at there's 3 sisters altogether, myself, I've got 2 younger sisters. And when you look at our educational experience, they are so wildly different. We went to, weirdly, 3 very different schools. My parents were very supportive that we would all go where we wanted to go. I mean, talk about making their lives difficult because they were all in very different places. But there we go. And our experience of education is very different. And especially my younger sister, who is dyslexic, and it totally, I would say, and I don't mean to say this in a dramatic sense, but I think it's true, it really did ruin her educational experience and her experience of school, because her dyslexia was not supported. It wasn't managed effectively. So she always felt different, an outsider, behind. She hated school, so she feigned sickness regularly, and to avoid it. Socially, absolutely fine. She's got a really solid group of friends, and her best friends are still the friends she went to school with. So it didn't hinder that so much, but it made her frightened of the classroom, and it really impacted her grades. That hasn't hindered her in her adult life or in her career, because she's forged it for herself. But what has always been a challenge is her self-confidence and self-belief. And I think it stems from that educational experience, and sort of trying to be forced to conform into spaces that you just can't operate with. It's interesting. I didn't know what your experience was, knowing personally that you've got an association with this as well.
I could talk about my own experience, but probably my children's experience is probably more interesting now. I mean, my own experience was undiagnosed dyslexic with ADHD traits and autistic traits, who didn't get diagnosed about 35, and only got diagnosed because his wife said that you think a bit differently, and if you're going to go off and do these, because I was going to do some exams I did some exams with the Chartered Institute of Marketing, and they told me it was going to be closed book essay style, and I was just like, I spent my whole life avoiding that stuff. I did engineering at university, I avoided that stuff, and now you want me to do it now, I can't do it. And it was then like the realization, and the classic, I'll never forget the comment from the guy that assessed me. He said, well, you're not thick, but there's a disparity between the way you talk, the person that's talking to me, and the person I see on paper, that is so huge that there's obviously something going on there. And that's what we call the spiky profile, i.e. there's huge disparity sometimes between verbal presentation and the written presentation. And that's something I wrestled with for a long time. I think specifically in the school space, it's really challenging for schools. I really get that. I don't know where there's this kind of movement in terms of assessment, particularly for dyslexia, and I don't know if that's now being fully opened up to include all the neurodivergent conditions, because I think that's really important, as we've already talked about, in terms of this co-occurrence. From our own, because we've got 4 children and 2 of them have diagnoses. 2 of them are, they kind of got some. There is some traits there, but they're really doing well, and it's not an issue. But we've noticed the support is there. There seems to be a lot more flexibility. But what's most exciting, I think, at the moment is this kind of whole shift in the way, particularly post-16 education is looking in terms of modern apprenticeships. I think there's a huge opportunity. So our eldest son, because he sits on the autistic spectrum, he has some really interesting special interests. I don't know how much you know it. So he is fascinated by PA and live sound.
Okay.
I mean, and have you ever read Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers? So he's done his 10,000 hours. Yeah. He's done his 10,000 hours and then some. So he's nervous about the fact he doesn't know his stuff. But when he goes to trade shows, he talks to people in the industry or experts who are going, actually, you really get this stuff. So he's actually been asked if he wants to go and do a degree level apprenticeship, which he can't do because he's not 18, he's only 15. So he's got to wait for that. But the point is, with these different approaches, suddenly doors can. Now, I know we're really fortunate there because his special interests have aligned with something that is commercially valuable and that he can do. That's not true for everyone. But that idea to actually get a bit more creative with the way the education system works, I think is really important.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is really, really important is that we deconstruct. And I think this is happening. And what I mean by that is you do not have to write perfect English to write great stories. And I don't know what your experience of school was, but my experience of school was writing stories out with my hand. And I can't even read my own handwriting.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So that's an issue. But I know now I can blog and stuff. I can write well, but I need the things and the processes around to support that.
Yeah.
But I never knew that until I was about 40.
Yeah. And I think that's true of as I said, my younger sister. I think it was that whole, because you had to fit into and conform into a box, if you like. If you didn't fit into it, there wasn't really much for you. And to be honest, I've actually found that in the workplace personally, when it comes to not, maths is not my strong point. It never has been. I am a creative sort. Everything I excelled in was, as you said, below the floorboard. Apart from English, I was good at that, which is quite honestly the only reason I think I actually got much kudos at school was because my English was strong. So at least I ticked one of the formal boxes. But the rest of my skill set sits way underneath the subjects that they don't really get that much they're not much celebrated. And it's kind of felt a little bit like that for me when I went into the workplace. And I still think I struggle a little bit with it now in my coaching, which is this sense that I still have this old stereotypical view that the skills that are valued in work are mathematical and commercial and those things that help on, very clearly and obviously generate cash flow for businesses, not the skills that I bring, which are annoyingly, the softer, and I'm putting them in inverted commas because there's nothing soft and easy about leadership and people and developing others. But, the creativity side, I think, is still the element that I know. I've worked in organizations who wanted to be really creative and would talk about it all the time and say how it's what they needed to be more innovative, to drive product development, to, secure future business, but actually still we're trying to conform everybody into a box.
And that's really interesting you say, Lisa, because when we talk about, if we sort of roll it back to neurodiversity, that's really relevant because lots of organizations, like you said at the beginning of the podcast, are recognizing this is a really interesting space. It's getting a lot of visibility. There's people making noise about it. We've got things like neurodiversity in business that are making, lots. There's a big wave of kind of recognition that this is important. But what I've seen quite a lot of is there's a lot of window dressing. But what does it look like on the employment cycle? What does it look like when you move through the organization? What does it look like when you want to progress? So it's one thing to get hired. How do you become the CEO?
Yeah.
Because actually, dyslexia is a really good example. Lots of people have got dyslexic traits, have really big picture thinking. They get how it all glues together, and it scares the crap out of people that they work for sometimes because they get it in a way that their bosses don't get it. But how do you embrace that and not get scared by it and work with it like a team instead of crushing it and saying, well, you're not performing at X, so we can't embrace Y?
You're not in my box.
Yeah. So how do we change the shapes?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really interesting, I think, because my experience often with leaders is for those leaders that really do care and they want to be better, there's a fear there about doing everything right and doing everything right for every individual, to the point where sometimes I find that individuals are so fearful of getting it right, they don't do anything. It's like it freezes them because they sort of manage to tell themselves, I'm not equipped to do this, I'm not experienced enough, i.e., there's this, that whole notion of like, well, because I've not experienced a neurodivergent individual before, or because I'm personally not dyslexic, suffer with ADHD, whatever, I'm not equipped to be able to do this. And it actually stops people, therefore, from doing anything. How would you advise an individual in that state where they've got the best intentions, but they're frightened?
I'd use a story. So, okay, my friend, Professor Amanda Kirby, she's a GP, yeah? So people come and see her all the time. Some of them have got nasty cancers and stuff. And do you know what? She hasn't had all those conditions. But she can still work with them and prescribe for them and work out the best treatment plan. And I think that's true for all this stuff. And it starts with that critical question of asking, what is useful? How can I support you? And that's not in the sense of you hand over the crown jewels and just say anything goes, but it's a negotiation in terms of working out what do you need to perform at your most effective. Where do we need to bring in additional support, and where do we just need to work stuff out ourselves? Because coming back to this idea that it's a project, I have worked with a lot of different people, but I've never worked with anyone like you, for example, Lisa. I've never worked with anyone like you, Susie. So actually, I can never come in and say, Lisa, if you had all these traits or whatever, I know exactly how to deal with you, because that just would not be true, because I would not know who you are and what you need until I asked you and worked it out. And I think this thing about partnership is really underrated and so essential for making this stuff work, because we work it out together. And sometimes the answer is going to be, this isn't the right job for you. But other times it's going to be, actually, with a few tweaks, we can make this work, and there's something that we can do differently. Because I'd argue a lot of the changes that help individuals who've got neurodivergent traits are simple to implement and really effective, but it has to be in partnership and there has to be trust. Stuff like actually how we do feedback, because some people need more feedback than others, but we'll never know what they need until we ask them. And we don't always have to take their first answer either, because sometimes that's about the relationship building. You know, it's like that thing about, I don't know if you've ever heard the story, you know, when a bloke walks down and gets married, and then afterwards his wife turns around to him and says, you never tell me you love me, but he said, well, I told you on our wedding day. What more do you need? It's just like, that's not efficient feedback. I need to know we're connected. I need to know where I'm at. So that's really a very rubbish way to tell the story, but that idea that actually different people need different stuff, but we have to keep asking, and we have to keep working it out. And feedback, I would argue, also needs to be what went well, even better if. You know, this sort of idea, because stuff goes wrong and we can always get better, but if we don't embrace it and move forwards from it, how on earth are we going to improve? And we, you know, and if we don't get things wrong, I'd argue we're not trying hard enough.
Yeah, I would as well. Well, we've talked a lot about this in previous episodes, and it's quite a theme that comes up quite often on the coaching cast, is about learning and the power of feedback. And I think in this context, what you said there is even more important around, you know, that piece around not assuming that you know what's going on for somebody, and actually coming from a place of understanding, of curiosity, and then you build it together. I love what you just said there about, you know, partnering together to create that environment for somebody to thrive at work and really amplify their strengths. You know, it's critical for anyone, but I think in this context it's even more critical, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'd add there as well, so it's about noticing. Because actually, I can say, don't diagnose, because we're not GPs. We're just managers or leaders or whatever we are. But we can notice. We can say, actually, Susie, I noticed that looks a bit tricky. Yeah. Do you want to talk more about that? Is that something I can support you with, or do you want to just me to leave that alone and never mention it again? You know, however you phrase it. But the fact you've noticed puts it in play.
Yeah, and so giving that person the choice as well to kind of respond or not, you know, in that sense. No, I love that.
Whatever you need to put around that in terms of, you know, it's fine, but I'd love to support you, or would you want to just work it out yourself, or who else do you want to talk to? Because actually, maybe I'm not the right person, but I just want to let you know that I've noticed, and I think it's important.
And I think it does come down to that whole, just because you're a leader or a manager doesn't mean you have all the answers and no one's expecting you to. I think that's an archaic view, and one that many of us we learn incorrectly when we're growing as managers. You don't have to have all the answers. Actually, the best question is, as you've already said, really, which is, what do you need? And just actually even asking a question rather than telling the answer, and that horrible word, you know, assuming you know. Because how could you possibly know if you know? I think that took me a long time to learn as a manager, and I made a lot of mistakes on the way, and I don't really regret it. Really, I think I could have probably avoided a lot of self issues and probably some damage to other people if I'd been taught that sooner. But like you said, sometimes you have to be prepared to fail, and you get such great learning from doing so, and that's usually lifelong learning. Usually the failures teach you things that you never forget. But yeah, just that question, like, what do you need and how can I support you? You know, sometimes that's the best gift, because actually it's saying two things. One, I'm interested in how I actually can support you, and two, I'm offering. You know, I've got your back, like I want to help. Which I just think are some of the most simple questions that just don't get used enough.
And that doesn't need to be a blank check either, because you can still have appropriate boundaries in there, and you can say, well, I know you need that, I can't give you that, but I can give you this. Is there somewhere we meet in the middle? I don't know why, but I just keep thinking about Tom Hanks in Apollo 13 when they're trying to work out how to get. Do you remember in the film when they're trying to work out how to use all the bits they've got left over in the module to make the breathing apparatus? And I think that idea of leadership that says, do you know what? This is what we've got. I don't know if we can make it work, but should we give it a go and see what we need?
Yeah. I get a sense you're a film buff, Nathan.
Well, sometimes. Mainly 80s films, obviously.
I am as well. I love films. I'm a huge film buff, so that's cool with me. I like the references for sure. So bringing this back more to you yourself, and your work as a coach. Why do people work with you?
Good question. I think part of it is the initial attraction comes around you kind of understand and know about this stuff, and then it's kind of setting the expectation. Actually, I don't know about it all, but I've worked in the area, which is quite useful. I think it's quite helpful to talk to people that have been around the area and have confidence in working it out in the unknown, which I think is really important. And also my particular, what I think is really important with this space is that you do it one step at a time. It's not about getting on a program. It's not about signing you up for the next 10 years. It's about actually, how do we work out one conversation at a time? And I think that's really important, because I really believe that people are sorted enough to solve their own problems. They just need someone to hold the space to work it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes that takes 5 minutes, and sometimes that takes a lot longer. But actually, someone that's prepared to say, and I don't know how long it's going to take, and I don't know what the conversation is going to look like, seems to work for quite a lot of people, and particularly in this space, because there's a lot of medical kind of terminology around it. But actually, if we believe that people are experts in their own stuff, that's kind of useful information and data. But actually, we need to talk to the person, and that's, I guess, is probably why people come and talk to me. I think anyway.
Yeah, I think that's such a great belief, because that's one that I share in my coaching as well, and actually, do you know what, as a coach, it really helps me to focus in on the individual even more and give them even more space, is that belief. They've got everything they need already. I just need to help them to work through it, to get it out, to get that clarity that potentially they just don't have. And I think that is the true power of coaching, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other things I did as well, Lisa, is quite interesting, is I do these things called workplace needs assessments, which are sort of, the idea is that you spend time with individuals to work out what their needs are in the workplace. And I had a brilliant bit of feedback. I spoke to someone the other day, because we talked about it and we've worked out possibly some coaching would be helpful, etc. And I spoke to her, said, what you want to do about the coaching? She said, well, I don't need the coaching, because we had the conversation and now I've worked out what I need to do. Now I'm going to go and do it. And the part of you with the commercial hat on's going, what a car crash. The part of you that wants to do a great job is going, that's flipping amazing. But that's what we have to hold, and actually it's all about what's best for the thinker.
Yeah, exactly. I had exactly the same situation yesterday, but on some training. So a different context, where I'd basically, by the end of the conversation, probably convinced the person that training wasn't the right thing for them, that I was actually trying to essentially influence them on. And I came off and I was like, but it wasn't the right thing for the person, and at that point in time, and actually ethically that's the right thing for me as a person. So you've got to sometimes go with it, but I can totally relate to that.
I think that's amazing, Serge, and I think that's where, I mean, just sort of to segue a bit more on the coaching side, that's why I think, I mean, a friend of mine, Claire Pedrick, talks about this idea of triage coaching, that actually coaching is not always the answer, but having a short coaching conversation can help you get to what the answer might be. It might be therapy, it might go and see the GP, it might be going to some counselling, it could be lumps of things, but quite often I think, if we think about what coaching really is, which is two people having a conversation where one person's doing the thinking, the other person's noticing and walking with them, that is a powerful space to work out the clutter of confused situations.
Yeah.
And that's really relevant in this. I think it's really relevant in the space that I work in, but also in lots of the other spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. So to start bringing our conversation to a close, sadly, I could talk to you all day. What would you offer as your top 3, you're allowed a 4th if you want. We're not that strict on the number. What would you offer as your kind of top 3 tips, if you like, to others who are listening, who are wanting to support neurodiversity in the workplace?
The most important thing is to ask them, whoever them may be, what they need. I'd encourage you to not be afraid as well, to have a conversation.
Yeah.
As we touched on already, don't diagnose, but notice.
That's really I like that. Important. Yeah. And notice, don't diagnose.
And don't be afraid to reach out. I know I probably got way over your top 4. And don't believe everything you read online, because actually there are lots of helpful personal stories which are true for individuals that may not be true for the situation that's in front of you. So, treat everything with the same way you would treat any sort of thing you're coming across. Ask questions, see if that's relevant, see if it's helpful, and offer it.
Yeah. Well, I really liked what you said quite early on, which is treat everyone as an individual.
Yeah.
I think it's approach everyone as a unique individual, because that is the truth. As much as we talk about sameness and normal, actually that doesn't really exist. Not really. Not
at all. And it's about connection as well, isn't it? Because I worked with a guy recently who's really quiet, withdrawn, timid. It turns out he's a dance DJ. I would have never known that, but until I asked him, what is it that floats your boat at the weekend? What is it that's going on here? And you find out there's actually this person that gets up in front of quite a lot of people and spins some discs. It's just like, but we never know till we ask.
No, yeah, totally. I've been surprised so many times by individuals, and therefore checked myself to go, you should never judge based on what they're showing you at any given time, because that's not the full story. Just because you're an open book, Lisa, and really transparent, don't really hold back on most things. It doesn't mean everybody else is that way, No,
absolutely. And we're all wonderfully made as well, which I think is the thing to
forget. Yeah, absolutely. So Nathan, if people would love to hear more from you, learn more about you and your work as the neurodivergent coach, where can they find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn. I've got a website. So if you want to get in contact, please feel free to connect, and I'm really happy to have a conversation.
Fantastic.
We'll also put all your details in our show notes for this episode.
So
if you have listened to this episode, you're interested in finding out more or connecting with Nathan, you can also go to the show notes and you'll find all the links there. We'll put them all in one place so that everyone can access them and reach out if needed.
So thank you so much for joining us, Nathan. It's been a fantastic conversation. Really appreciate your stories, sharing your personal experience and your real knowledge and skill in this space. It's been brilliant.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nathan. Really enjoyed chatting to you today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
We are coming to the end of today's fantastic episode, where we've had the privilege of talking to Nathan Whitbread about neurodiversity in the workplace. So Nathan's top tips from today are as follows. Number 1 is notice, but don't diagnose. So really important, just really be curious about the individuals you work with and your team members, and be aware of anything that you believe is a challenge for them potentially, and use it as data to support good conversations. Number 2, so these are some self-coaching questions for you to use as well. So think about how you can apply these potentially with those you work with. So they are, number 1, ask, what do you need? So if you're noticing that someone may be being challenged in some way, ask them what they need. Don't assume you know what is right for them. And consider the question, how can I support you? So really support them to tell you how you can help. Number 3, do not be afraid to have conversations. So I think, we had a really great conversation with Nathan there about how at times our willingness and our real want, our desire to care for others and to support them can possibly freeze us in a space where we don't feel we're well equipped or have the experience. But As Nathan said, the real key here is to not be afraid. The most important thing you can do is to actually start the conversation. And number 4 is always remember, individuals, all of us, we are all unique. We are all completely different. So therefore, it's a key that whatever we put together is with that person in mind, with their input, and really takes into account their uniqueness. And actually, we celebrate it and we support the diversity, because that's where the true creativity and innovation comes. So don't worry about trying to remember those. They will be on our Instagram page this week after the publishing of the episode. And you'll also be able to find them on our website as well. So Instagram is @thecoachingcast and our website is thecoachingcast.co.uk.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode with Nathan and have some new ideas, thoughts, or inspiration to take away and give a try for yourself. If you've got any questions, thoughts, or feedback, or even if you'd love to guest on the Coaching Cast, you can contact us in 3 ways. On email at hello@thecoachingcast.co.uk, on the gram @thecoachingcast, and you can also contact us through our website, thecoachingcast.co.uk.
The gram, down with the kids.
Yeah.
Down with the kids. Your support helps more than you know. So if you like what you've heard today and you would like to help us to grow the podcast and join our CBB community, that's our corporate bullshit basher community, then leave us a review on the Apple Podcast app. You have no idea, how important these are. They really help others to find us as a podcast. Yeah. Hit subscribe wherever you listen so that you get first notification of new episodes. And also give us a follow on the gram, as Susie has just said, @thecoachingcast. And that's where we post regularly our episode releases, top tips, coaching questions, and just general hilarity and nonsense that we're getting up to. And last but by no means least, don't forget, you can watch these episodes on YouTube and also on our website. So on YouTube, just search for The Coaching Cast. So finally, we both love music and we use it to motivate and energize us. So we like to finish each episode with our personal song recommendation, giving you some positivity, some energy, and even some inspiration as you launch into your next meeting. So it's my choice this week, and I've chosen an oldie. I'm a big Van Morrison fan, and I've chosen his track, Dweller on the Threshold. It's a good one. Thank you so much for listening to us speak with Nathan today. And remember, CBBs, you've got this.